Good afternoon. Welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals. It is good to see you here. And today we're talking about the axis of moralism and effectiveness. The axis of moralism and effectiveness. And there's something that I've noticed when this is one of the 30 videos, more than 30 now, that I've had backlogged, stuff that I want to bring to you, that I'm struggling to find the time to do so. But there's so much good information and perspective that I want to bring you. This is one of them. The axis of moralism and effectiveness is something that I've noticed as ideologues talk, whether religious or otherwise, even in the political domain, doesn't matter where the ideology happens, there's an emphasis on being right or correct more so than an awareness of actual consequences or goals that correlate to genuine effectiveness. Okay. You'll see this a lot in young parents, especially first time parents. They've read a bunch of books. They're familiar with all kinds of do's and don'ts, do this, don't do that. And then they're real dogmatic about it and real stringent about it. and by the time their third or fourth kid rolls around, it's not just like laziness and being worn out, but they start to see things a little bit differently. But then by the time your kids grow up and they become adults, now you really start to see a little bit clearly. It's like, wow, all that stuff that I was seeing. But the problem is there's like a catch-22 situation because you kind of really don't know. You at that age, you just really don't know. Anyway, we got a lot of good stuff for you here. I want to encourage you to support this channel if you don't already. Beyondthefundamentals.com. We have so many things that we're trying to do, but just can't because we don't have the time, and time is money. That's just really how it is. Okay. We have 5 different ways to transfer to if you want to 5 different electronic ways. I'm swapping the wrong slideshow over here because I have the slideshow open in 2 different instances over here, one that I can edit. If you wanna support us, we're Zelle, PayPal, Wise, Venmo, Cash App, any of the things that you see there on the screen, or you can scan the QR code that I'm gonna put up here just for a second. Or you can go to beyondthefundamentals.com/donate or click on our donate page in the menu, okay? Excuse me. There's not a lot of content out there for Christians who are maturing past what stage 3, past what is offered at just about any of the churches that are out there. This is one of the few places. So it's very important to keep this going. Support this if you believe in it so that we can grow it into something that is more robust and more useful and more people know about because those who do get exposed to it, a lot of positive feedback. It's helping a lot of people. If you want to follow us, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and here. Remember to share and like when you see us there. Whenever we go live, we post our live event like this one. I posted a few minutes ago. I would like to post. I would like to have like a every day or so many times a week. Everyone knows when we're going live, but we're not there yet. Okay, not monetarily there yet. I don't have enough predictability in order to be able to do that. So when I can carve out time, we just go with it. That's where we are now. But we post here on X, Twitter, and on Facebook. And then if you hit the bell icon and you're a subscriber, you also get notified in YouTube in your YouTube app. So make sure you stay with us there. We also offer online one-on-one sessions, one-on-one consultations. If you want a one-on-one consultation with me, we have paid one-on-one consultations covering all of the growth and transformation, or really anything you want to spend the hour talking about. You can even get a personalized growth and transformation assessment of yourself. Okay. Through this one-on-one consultation, we have a video on how I quickly assess someone's growth stage. We've covered lots of growth and transformation content, really hitting hard since the beginning of 2023. Okay. And there's only so much you can tell to a broad audience. So if you want that applied to yourself, to your own particular situation, a one-on-one session is the way to go. Can't do them with everybody. That's why they are paid, but they are available. They are there if you want them. So go to beyondthefundamentals.com and scroll down. What I have noticed is that there seems to be a, let me get rid of this QR code now. There seems to be an axis between moralism and effectiveness. You'll notice that when American Christianity essentially injects us with the addictive drug of moralism to anesthetize us from the pain of how ineffective we are. That's so when you're listening to an ideologue, a church person, a pastor, and they're saying things in a very sanctimonious tone, usually you'll hear them say very sanctimonious things like, and I'm not saying I disagree necessarily with some of these things, although I would word them differently in some cases. They will say things like, the salvation is by grace through faith. Okay. What is faith though? You ever looked at Hebrews 11:7 to see what faith is? By faith Noah moved with fear. So he did something. Trust the finished work of Christ on the cross. God is sovereign. God is all-knowing. God is powerful. We have Christ's imputed righteousness. And in this version of Christianity, people are deemed effective to the degree that they can persuade other people to affirm these same ideas the same way they do. Now they haven't fixed anything. They haven't fixed the supply chain at the grocery store or the shortage of eggs, for example. They haven't fixed that, you see? They haven't fixed problems with the education system. They haven't fixed problems in homeschooling or Christian schooling. I mean, there's problems everywhere. And we got these grandstanders standing behind pulpits saying these things in a very moralistic tone, and it just doesn't help anything. They're not helping anything practically. Now, that's kind of what I want to get into more. I'm not necessarily saying these things are wrong, but what I'm saying is that when we come to the specifics of the narrative of Christianity, those are not the end state. That's not the end goal. Those are essentially tools that should be employed in how we behave. Tracking? You follow me? So the fact that, okay, you want to say, okay, Jesus is God. Okay, great. How does that affect your behavior? Making that statement and having the correct doctrine about Christology and all that, doesn't help anything in the world. Doesn't help anything. Okay, when you go to the grocery store and they don't have any eggs, what does that statement help? Okay, nothing. When your neighborhood floods and it's time to pull out the boats and the canoes and go around town, your neighborhood, and rescue people out of their houses before the flood gets them, what does that statement help? Nothing. Okay. Let's say your neighborhood floods and your neighbor that wants to help you happens to be a Muslim who doesn't believe that Jesus died and rose again, but they have a boat and they're willing to help rescue people from the houses before they flood. Do you just not let them help? Do you not participate with them because you don't agree on some abstract idea that's neither here nor there in the practical sense of right now? You see, I'm not saying these things are untrue. What I'm saying is that just affirming them is not the measure of whether or not we're effective or, if you orthodox or correct or Christian. Jesus is the way. He's the truth. He's the life. If you are following the way, you behave in a certain way. Now, when I say that, your mind should recall the video that we just released recently on faith, hope, and love, and how faith relates to relationship, love relates to action, and hope relates to disposition. You have two bonded triads. So, action, relationship, and disposition constitute the way that is Christ, the bonded triad of the way that is Christ. And that's how we should move forward. So, when I say things like that, that's what it should conjure up. Now, when it comes to the axis of moralism and effectiveness, people who are ideologically possessed, they are ideologues. What you will find is that their reasoning is more moralistic. If they're a leftist, Democrat kind of save the earth kind of person, it's not just that whatever they're saying is true, it's that you're immoral if you don't agree or see things a different way, or if you have more information, or if you recognize that the IPCC report summary report doesn't match the actual report, and you state those facts. No, you're not allowed to disagree. You are immoral if you drive an SUV. If you have a 6.2 liter V8 in your vehicle, you are just terrible, and you hate the future and hate our kids and all this kind of stuff. You don't want our kids to grow up in a better place. It's moralized. Okay. And the reason I'm using a political example like that is to give you an example outside of the religious realm. It's not just religious people that do this. It's all sorts of people that do this. When it comes to the issue of abortion, oh, it's either murder or you're taking away women's rights. I mean, either way, no matter what your opinion is, it's you're immoral, you're a murderer, or you're a misogynist. Either way, that's you're immoral somehow for disagreeing or for having a different viewpoint. And nobody's trying to solve the hard problem. And the hard problem is, how do we not murder anybody and not violate anybody's rights? How do we do that? Apparently, we don't know yet. We don't know. We haven't figured that out because we're not effective. So we run around spout. So if you have a strong opinion about how things should be, just shut up and let's figure out what we can do to achieve that without harming something else legitimate that other people also care about, because other people's concerns are legitimate. How do we get it all? How do we do it? It's possible. It is possible. Now, when you're talking to people, a very good help that I found, we've covered this book on this channel by Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay. We've covered this book on this channel, and they show how when people's tone gets moralistic, that is a huge clue that you're dealing with an ideologue, that not only do they have very strong opinions, but it is strongly implied. They're probably not going to come out and say this. The Calvinist isn't going to say, if you don't believe God is sovereign like I do, then you're immoral. They're not going to say that exactly, but they are going to strongly imply it, that you are somehow inferior or insufficient in some moral way. You're exalting yourself above the sovereignty of God, all this kind of stuff. Now, this book is very helpful because it gives you clues for how to have conversations with people, but it also can make you fluent in what to spot in somebody so that you know whether or not you're dealing with somebody who's operating in good faith and is willing, and they're not egoically and emotionally identified with the conclusions that they're spouting. They can work in what's called margins of confidence rather than absolute authoritative dogmatic certainty. And it'll let you know if you're dealing with somebody like that versus somebody who is just so ideologically possessed. So what you do is you kind of look for the moralism laced in their language and the moral implications laced in their language. Well, if you don't agree with this thing about how salvation works, then you don't believe God knows everything and he's omnipotent. Otherwise, da 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 da. And syllogisms too. Syllogisms go along with that. Syllogisms that are overly simplistic and have moral implications tied to them. What you will find, what my observation is, and I'm submitting this as like I don't know everything everywhere, but what my observation is that people who come with this moralistic approach, they tend to be ineffective in a practical sense in real life. And I wish I were kidding. I wish I were kidding. Now, I've known people who can do things effectively. Maybe they're a doctor. Maybe they are an engineer. What's the guy's name? He does a lot of creation stuff. He was a hydrologic engineer. All right, so there are some people who are effective and can do things that happen to be Christian. And we probably need to pay more attention to them and less attention to the people who standing behind a pulpit is really the only job they can get. Okay? Like, yeah, I stand here, um, I'm sitting here telling you things from a perspective from the Bible, but that's not the only thing that I can do. You see? I'm also a musician. I'm also a retired Army officer. I've been to war twice. I was a signal officer. I work in communications, and I've ran contracts for the government and for the private sector. And I work in cybersecurity and I do IT project management. There are things that I can do in the real world where I have effectiveness and people pay me for my skills and expertise. Okay. And so I'm bringing that degree of effectiveness and the same kind of analytical skills and whatnot to a more spiritual mindset. And when I say a spiritual mindset, I'm talking about how do we make ourselves better within various different spiritual traditions. And the one that we're in this channel is Christianity. I come from a Christian background, and it is completely sufficient. If you stay away from the stage 3 religious 1984 stuff that's out there, which is pretty much everywhere, if you actually allow the Bible to inform you, it has the potential to make people grow and to make them be better. So we're fighting against this. We've covered a lot of when you see the sanctimonious language, you'll find it a lot. You'll see it all over the place with these Calvinists when they're making their case for Calvinism. They have very moralistic tones. We could take the time. We've taken the time in multiple videos to review sermons from these guys and to review statements from these guys, and they're very moralistically laced. And the moralism, what that does is it covers up for effectiveness. Now, that's very important that you understand this, okay? That the moralism covers up for effectiveness. And, and something that we've talked about on this channel before is that there are certain things that in our minds substitute for other things, and we don't realize that's happening. So listen closely to me. The way this most often happens is we associate victimhood with virtue, okay? For example, if you imagine the picture of a woman who is obviously battered, she's got black eye, maybe a broken arm, and she's dragging 3 kids behind her, who also look like they've been abused and maybe neglected, and she's going into a battered woman's shelter. What people do is they automatically think that the husband is a bad guy, or some guy is a bad guy, stepdad, baby, whatever, and that she is virtuous. We attribute virtue to this kind of victimhood. But we do this not even knowing the backstory. And the backstory could be that she has been neglecting the kids, and the husband walked in and caught her making child porn videos with the kids, lost his mind, punched her in the eye, and broke her arm. Now, you see, that's a little different story. He finds out she's been pimping the kids out for money, loses his mind, hits her in the face. Now, granted, there's other things you should do, like call the cops, but you can understand how somebody might react this way if this is happening to their kids. Okay. So you see, suddenly the story changes. So we make so many assumptions and presumptions. In politics, you see this all the time. Somebody will be exalted because they walked the road to Selma, or they were in Birmingham and had the dogs and fire hoses unleashed on them. And just having this bad thing happen to them somehow, or participating in some kind of self-sacrificial event that stands for a good cause, makes us think of them as virtuous. And there's absolutely no reason to presume that they are virtuous. As far as we know, they could be involved in some kind of organized crime somewhere. They could be beating their wife and kids. It could be who knows? We don't know the backstory. Okay. So just being involved in something, so this whole victimhood for virtue kind of thing is something that we do automatically. In Christian circles, you see this a lot. When you disagree with a doctrine, sometimes people will cite a martyr. Well, so and so believed this and they were burned at the stake. You want to tell me that they were insincere and wrong? Well, the fact that somebody believes something doesn't make them right. And the fact that some horrible people wanted to burn them for that doesn't make them right. The thing that is either right or wrong is right or wrong, whether or not anybody burned at the stake for it. So, yes, that's terrible that that happened. It's terrible that somebody gets burned at the stake. We don't want that to happen, and we shouldn't burn people at the stake that we disagree with. But being burned at the stake doesn't make you right, and it doesn't make you virtuous, doesn't make you good. Are you following me? Now, in the exact same way, when people are sitting in church, and this is kind of frustrating to me, but when people are sitting in church, moralistic language translates as good, right, true, and effective in people's minds, the same way victimhood automatically substitutes for virtue when we can demonstrate with hard cases that it does not. In the same way, in our minds, when somebody's behind a pulpit and they have a position of authority and they speak moralistically, especially if there's tribalism involved and they're on your tribe, when they speak moralistically and sanctimoniously, it substitutes in our mind for virtuous effectiveness. Now, notice on this effectiveness side, I have things people have actually done. I have little space shuttles. People have built cars. They've built very impressive bridges. They've built very impressive skyscrapers and satellites and computers and solar panels and restaurants. I mean, people can do things. There are people who can do things. You ever heard that statement, people who can do, people who can't teach? Now, that's kind of demeaning to teachers, probably. And I say that because Paula Paula was a teacher. She now works for the state government and does like super smart things. She has a master's degree and she's like the most valuable intellectual person on the team. I'm super impressed with her intellect, her professionalism, all this stuff. So I don't necessarily agree with that axiom, but I can see how in some cases that's the case. And when I was in the military, huh, we would wind up with chaplains. This was pretty bad, and when I was in Iraq, we had, like, all the chaplains from all the different battalions and brigades kinda hung out together at the Cobb Spiker Chapel. They all had little offices together, and they'd all be there, and they'd go back to their battalions and then come to the chapel, that kinda thing. And when you listen to them preach or you talk to them or interact with them, it became very obvious that these people could not functionally have a ministry on the outside. And so going into the military, taking their MDiv credentials, getting an endorsement from their denomination, and coming in as a chaplain was like, I don't really have to be effective. Now they're a staff officer. They can take their ministry credentials, which might as well be expertise in Dungeons and Dragons. It's just absolutely nonsense. And that can translate into being a military staff officer, and you get paid as an officer for this nonsense and ineffectiveness. And then they were also ineffective as chaplains by far, especially given the things that the soldiers over there were having to face that these chaplains could not help them with. Okay. So, in the same way, what happens is people wind up pastoring, like, um, Lester Roloff said this very well. He's talking about God's call on the preacher, and he said, uh, a back 40, hot sun, and a stubborn mule have called more people to preach than God has. In other words, like, it's hard work out there plowing in the field with a mule. It's a lot easier if "Oh, God's called me to preach." Now you get to go sit inside in the air conditioning or, at least under some kinda shade back then, and study things and say things all the time, but you're not actually effective anymore. You're not actually growing any crops anymore. So what happens, these people talk, all this moralism comes out of their mouth, and they are ineffective. They can't do anything. Well, this is a very nice comment here. Tommy says, "I was fortunate to meet Kevin At the Flowers White debate, he is the real deal and very consistent in his beliefs and his trueness to Scripture. Well, I really appreciate that endorsement. Thanks for that. I hope I don't let you down. Remember to keep your eyes on the real thing and not me. So I saw this statement. We've covered these stealth Calvinist guys, and I was actually doing another video where I was wanting to get. Let me see if I can get my pen here. I was wanting to get Rodney's picture for one of the other clip videos that we've put out that Roberta helps us produce. And thanks so much to her for that. And as I was looking for pictures of him to put in a thumbnail, because we're reviewing his sermon, and it's putting a little snippet in there, I came across this Twitter post of his from August 27th, 2022. Now think about this. Think about this moralism and effectiveness, and think about this statement here. He literally says this, and I couldn't make this up if I tried. And I had already made most of this slideshow before I saw this. So this is like a little gift here. He says, "A better world is not about achievements and prosperity. It's about a relationship with God and enjoying Him. A better world is not about achievements and prosperity. It's about a relationship with God and enjoying Him." Now, I'm going to do something to this slide. I'm going to move that up there, and now I'm going to post a scripture in it. And I want you to tell me how this pans out. I want you to compare these two statements and figure out how this would have worked for Noah. Tell me in the chat, how would this have worked for Noah if God says, "Look, Noah, I need you to build a boat, and I need you to put your family in there, and you're gonna have to stay in there for a year. You're gonna put all the animals in there, and it's gonna stink, and you have to feed them, da da da, all the things." And Noah's like, "Listen, God, a better world is not about achievements. I'm not gonna build a boat. As long as I have a relationship with you, forget the boat. Who needs a boat? I don't need to achieve anything. I don't need to do anything. It's not about achievements and prosperity," which, by the way, by the time Noah got off the ark, he was the richest man on earth. Right? Wasn't he? Hmm. Now, he might be the whole prosperity thing, he might be, going against the prosperity gospel, but we serve the creator of the yeah, he would drown. That's exactly right. A. Hannah said he would drown. Yeah, what would happen to Noah if he had followed Rodney Navy's advice here? Better world is not about achievements. Well, you better achieve the building of that boat, or like Hannah says here, you're gonna drown. You're gonna drown. It's gonna be over. Lights out, buddy. Bam. Look, there are some things that we have to do. As Christians, there are some things that we have to do. And it's not about, he says a relationship with God and enjoying Him. How about walking worthy of the vocation wherewith you are called? Ephesians 4:1. How about that? How about being before Him in blameless in love? How about we are His workmanship created in Christ Jesus unto good works, which God hath before ordained that we should walk in them? What does that look like? We should be doing some Noah stuff. Now, building the boat isn't ours to do, that was his to do, but there's a vocation wherewith you are called in your life. You should be doing something. You should be working to solve some problem in your lifetime, okay? And it should be evident by time you die that something is good or better because you were here. That's what should happen. So in my thumbnail on this video, I have this photo, but I also have some more. I have some of these over here, and for some reason, I couldn't get the design feature usually sorts these out for me, and this time it didn't. But I think these pictures are very interesting, so I think it's kind of worthwhile if we sort these real quick and look at some of these photos because of the images, the imagery of these photos is very interesting to me. You get me? And I guess I could put them on different slides. So over here you have this guy that's kind of divided between halfway. Huh. Yeah, I should probably move this one over here so I'm not blocking it up. But you have this guy who is he's talking to these people over here who feel all moral and righteous, and over on this side, you have people who are actually doing research and development and learning to make things work. By the way, the MRI device, magnetic resonance imaging, I just had an MRI a couple days ago on my back. That was invented by a young Earth creationist. Isn't that interesting? So just because you have serious beliefs and believe the Bible's true doesn't mean you don't have to sit in a pew being ineffective somewhere. You can actually do something. You can affect something. And these are all AI generated images after I gave it a pretty long prompt. Ha. And I said, okay, how would you generate an image based on this? And then, okay, here's splitting down the middle, this guy on his brain. And then has things in a balance over here. We're feeling all moralistic, but we can't make anything work over on this side. And over here, this is an interesting one. I almost made this one the thumbnail. It shows a guy addressing a crowd, and obviously the world is just absolute destruction all around him. That's kind of how we are. That's what I see. In in our society, we got all these Christians with all these opinions about all the different genders and the LGBTQ community and anything from abortion to education to COVID pandemics. We have all these opinions, but all we do is yell them around in little echo chambers and have rivalry and tribalism going on. It's really all we're good at doing. And meanwhile, the world is in absolute chaos, and we who are in the world but not of the world are not doing anything effectively to make it any better or to help anyone in any practical way. So the world is correct to look at us and be like, these guys are a bunch of ineffective tools, and religion is an opiate of the masses, just lulling them to sleep. They're exactly right. They're exactly right. The world is just absolute chaos around us. Nobody knows which way is up or down or which bathroom they can go into. Nobody knows anything. And we don't have any answers. Now, we can claim moralistic answers, but we're not solving any problems. And when I say that, all these little anomalies that people are so opinionated about, what you have to realize that there is some signal in everything. There is some signal in the fact that some of our institutions and traditions are just constructs. There's some signal in that. And there is some signal in the fact that certain things in our traditions don't necessarily have to be that way. They could be a different way. You don't always have to cut off the end of the ham before you put it in the pan, just because grandma did. Um, and there are certain things that tend to be biologically fixed that maybe some people think are constructs, but we're finding out through experience that they're not. They're kind of biologically fixed. There are certain things like hypergamous attraction in men and women tends to be biologically fixed. It tends to be not much we can do about that. It's also very interesting that in our society, a lot of people don't realize this, but love marriages are like less than 200 years old. Love marriages. We get married because we fall in love. We pick somebody to marry. We have not been doing this for very long. Okay. So when the Bible has all this guidance for marriages and what you should do, you have to realize that all those people were having spouses picked for them. Okay. So there's a lot of things that are different now that we don't really have a lot of experience with. And the idea of having love marriages at all. Having marriage is one thing, but then having them based on falling in love, that being the determining factor on whether or not you get married. Falling in love was seen as, like, the early Greeks, they saw that as a detriment, something you wanted to avoid at all cost, and they pictured it as getting shot with an arrow, not in a little cute Valentine's Day kinda way, but in a mortal wound kinda way. And you notice that all the romance all the romance plays, they all end in tragedy. People are dying and the houses are apart. Romeo and Juliet, suicide after absolute chaos. Yeah, John says, and what does enjoying him actually convey? It comes across as rhetoric. Yeah. What do you mean enjoying him? Dan says, I would pick up my cross, but it's a lot of effort. And anyway, I'm too busy enjoying God. Exactly. And I think he's, using satire to demonstrate how it is. And it's monotonous and uninspiring and boring. Who wants to do that? Who wants to pick up my cross? Who wants to voluntarily adopt responsibility to make something better? Nobody wants to do that. Came across a very interesting. And it's interesting how things come my way once I start making a slide deck. I started making this slide deck a while back, had this idea for a few months now. I've been wanting to say this, and this popped up. Somebody said, your beliefs don't make you better. Your beliefs don't make you a better person. Your behavior does. I think that's right. Now, what that made me think of in churches, we have this doctrine called doctrine. Here we don't deal with doctrine of propositional statement. We don't deal with that here at Beyond the Fundamentals. We don't see that kind of nonsense in Scripture. The doctrines in Scripture are procedural and participatory, not propositional. Now we have all these books. We have all these books that are full of propositional doctrines. The way of Christ is not a collection of propositional doctrines. All the biblical doctrine is procedural and participatory. Nick says enjoying God kind of turns him into a piece of chocolate cake or whatever kind of cake you like. So I'm not saying the doctrine or the idea of imputed righteousness is wrong. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying, though, is that the doctrine of imputed righteousness is the perfect excuse that professing Christians need to think that they are virtuous because of certain beliefs that they hold, but they excel at being absolute jerks when it comes to ethics and relationships. So there's no reason to actually exhibit righteousness. So when we read that statement from Jesus, except your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, well, we don't take that as a practical thing, like I actually have to do better than them. We take it as, oh, well, we find out later from Paul that we get all that righteousness from Jesus. You see, when Jesus is making these statements, he's actually not talking about the doctrine of imputed righteousness there. The way I was taught as an independent Baptist is that this difficulty in having righteousness that exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, this difficulty is resolved, not in following the law or doing good things, but in the fact that the righteousness of Christ becomes our righteousness, and he made him to be sin for us who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. Yes, I have the Awana Excellence Award. I know all the verses. Okay, I can quote them. I know what they are. 2 Corinthians 5:21. So we can say all this stuff about all this righteousness, and so what that does is it alleviates us of the responsibility to actually act out right doing. It alleviates us of the responsibility of building our proverbial boat. What is it that we're supposed to be doing? What problem are we supposed to be engaged with solving? The doctrine of imputed righteousness actually makes us think that our beliefs make us a better person. If you believe in the idea of imputed righteousness, that makes you a better person in the eyes of God. You're so wretched and depraved, you can't be a better person by any of your deeds. So forget that. Just keep being a jerk to everybody. Keep having terrible ethics. and just move on with your life because, hey, I've got imputed righteousness. It's a really bad having a doctrine like this that is emphasized along with deprecation of the self worked in as a doctrine, a perpetual doctrine that's always ongoing, self-deprecation. I'm such a wretched, horrible, evil sinner. That's not humility, by the way. And that's certainly not epistemic humility. That's epistemic arrogance. Okay. You are created in the image of God. And the light which lighteth every man that cometh into the world, that includes you. And when the Bible says man, it clears it up in Genesis 1:26 and 27. It includes mankind, male and female. So it's not a misogynist, sexist, patriarchal thing. From Genesis chapter 1, we find out that when the word man is used in the Bible generically, it's referring to mankind, male and female. It's the light which lighteth every man that comes into the world. That's in you. Christ in you, the hope of glory. It's in there. And so I played around with a few things, and what I'm trying to do is come up with a few examples. And so how can we be effective? What is effective edification, for example? An effective edification. I was listening to Tom Wadsworth, and I think Alana sent me one of his videos a while back, and he was on Jason Breeda's channel, and then more recently, Kurt sent me some of his stuff. And so I've been listening to some of his information about the early church and early worship and all this sort of thing. And he makes this point that the early church did not meet. And this is stuff we've been saying on Beyond the Fundamentals for years. We've been saying this at least since 2019, that the early church was not all, or the ideal church ultimately. Ephesians 4 model is not a broadcast modality of one person preaching a sermon to many people, but in Ephesians 4:16, the edification modality is many to many, many to many, one to many, many to one, but all around. It's a mesh net, like what networking terms would call a mesh network topology, where everybody is a sender and a receiver. It's not just one dude that's a sender and everybody else is a receiver. That's how you create echo chambers. That's how you elevate people too high above their status. Okay. So the bishop of a church should actually just be a facilitator and overseer, somebody who keeps the order, but not the only person doing the talking. Last Wednesday night in FSI, we had a meeting where it was facilitated by somebody else, by Nick K, but another guy was the primary speaker or initiated things, and then there were other participants. I wasn't even there. Okay. So if you were to put me in the role of the overseer of the group, I'm facilitating it by making the space available. We have somebody else who's facilitating the actual process of what happened, and then 12, 15 people are all talking and reacting to each other, and everybody leaves feeling like something good has happened, and they're encouraged and challenged to behave better in their interactions and processes in their regular life. And they walk away being able to relate better, understanding themselves better, having more emotional intelligence. All this stuff is happening. So my question for Tom Wadsworth, that I just kind of asked out loud when he said, it was all about edification. Well, I'm like, well, great, but how do you determine whether or not edification has taken place? How do you know that has happened? How do you know that it's been effective edification? That's not exactly straightforward. We don't exactly know when somebody's edified, and sometimes the way we the way we measure edification now is if people learn all the things, and in Bloom's taxonomy of learning, this is like the lowest kind of learning, to learn and rote memory, repeat all the correct doctrines, and be able to repeat them with the same kind of sanctimony and authority that you heard them with. That's what they think edification is. If they can walk out of here and stay married and homeschool their kids and talk about the doctrine of supralapsarianism, then they have been edified. No, you have not been edified. I have another video coming out talking about if you're a Christian and you're married, you're not even married to your spouse. So stay tuned for that one. You're gonna enjoy that. A lot of people who think they're married, they're not even married. You never married your spouse, and I'll show you why when that video comes out. So my answer to that question, how do you identify when edification has occurred, would be the simple thing of how do you assess someone's growth stage, and have they moved from the left to the right? Like, I don't have these charts in this particular show, but have they moved from the left to the right when it comes to all these growth and transformation metrics? Like on this chart, I'll just use these little ones over here to make the point. But like, have they come from here over here for all those things that are listed? Have they come from over here? Have they made progress in this direction for all those things listed? Have they come from over here to over here and all the things listed? Have they come from down here in Mammon Church up to here with any of these metrics that are listed there? Are they using all four kinds of knowing? Have they come from the left to the right on any of these metrics? See, so we have a lot of things that we've tried to enumerate out. And have you been edified? Well, you get evaluated in these things. Matter of fact, somebody just asked for an evaluation recently, and I took all the metrics that we listed in this video, and I gave them an assessment of where I thought they were based on my perspective for all these things. And then the idea would be, okay, in 3 years or maybe in a year, we do that again, and have they made any movement? Have they made any progress? Let's look at the edification assessment we did a year ago or 6 months ago, and let's see if we have made any progress. Where are we? So have enumerated metrics in the person. Now, anytime you do this, you could be violating Goodhart's law. So you got to be very careful with that. As soon as you identify something as a metric of success, it breaks down as being useful as a metric of success. That's also a problem. So there's a catch-22 here. But you get the idea. We can't afford to just be nebulous with edification anymore. We need to really start narrowing down what we're meaning by this. I told ChatGPT, I'm doing a presentation on how people are making up for their ineffectiveness with moralistic ideological adherence and moralistic ideological propagation. It seems that on one end of the spectrum is moralism, and on the other end of the spectrum is effectiveness. Those who give or imply moral reasons to agree with them are signaling uh, that they are ineffective at anything practical in life. In other words, when the pastor reaches up there and implies that you are immoral if you don't see God's sovereignty the same way he does, he's signaling to you that he is ineffective in life. This also allows them to dismiss anything that might be complex or difficult. For example, Freud was a pioneer in his field and made all sorts of advances in the field of psychology. However, those who are overly simplistic will dismiss all of his work as a whole because some of it turned out to not be correct. So yeah, Freud wasn't right in everything, but he was a pioneer. And they fail to recognize that the advancements that his imperfect pioneering afforded to everyone who came after him. Some professing Christians dismiss Freud as sinful and immoral and use that as an excuse to discard his entire body of work or his contributions. And they certainly do the same thing about like the Kinsey report and stuff like that. Fundamentalist Christians have this idea that we are deemed moral if we simply say and affirm things like the following. Salvation is by grace through faith. Trust the finished work of Christ on the cross. God is sovereign. God is all-knowing. God is powerful. We have Christ's imputed righteousness. However, Christians tend to be ineffective and delivering on anything of any practical value. It should be maybe ineffective in, the prompt is done. We're not going to fix the prompt because it's already been processed. But I think ChatGPT understands. They say that we should love our spouse. And what this prompt is doing is letting you know where my mind is and the things that are floating around in my head, which I think is helpful to understand what we're talking about here. It may edify them in ways we didn't foresee. That also happens a lot. They say that we should love our spouses and that divorce is a sin, yet they don't equip anyone with practical or effective guidance for how to accomplish either one of those. Like, how do you love your spouse, especially when they're putting you in double binds all the time and they make you resent them all the time? How do you love a person like that? Christianity doesn't help you with that. And many Christian marriages are ending in divorce or existing altogether in pure misery. Like they perpetuate, they don't get divorced, but it's still a failed relationship because they're both miserable and they're in hatred and dysfunction. Saying that God is sovereign or that God is omnipotent or that salvation is by grace through faith or that hell is eternal conscious torment doesn't practically help anything. It doesn't help food production supply lines. It doesn't enhance the availability or efficiency of the textile industry. It doesn't help with transportation requirements or air travel or research or development in medicine. It doesn't solve or resolve any social issues. It just exacerbates the problems in these areas and many others, all while making people feel righteous and virtuous and moral for affirming these kinds of things and agreeing with various religious in groups about them. Tribalism. Daniel Schmachtenberger said that during the COINTELPRO, the CIA was concerned that various anti-war and anti-government and anti-military organizations might pose a serious national security threat to the United States, risking a possible revolution. So they spread the ideology through these groups of postmodernism. Instead of fighting the potential revolution head on, this had the effect of making the adherents of the ideology feel more moral and virtuous for believing certain things while also making them quite ineffective at actually carrying out a revolution. And what I've been trying to scream to Christians, I think that is exactly what has happened to Christians. Instead of following the way that is Christ and making improvements in the world that God created, which we should, those who are following the creator ought to be the best at this, but we're terrible at it. We're not doing anything to help anybody. And what we are doing, we are believing things that make us feel moral, righteous, and virtuous for believing them, but also making us quite ineffective at actually bringing about worthwhile change in the world that could be helpful to anybody. We can't implement the way of Christ in our own life, much less than anybody else's. I offer people personal and relationship counseling as part of my business. What I'm finding more and more is that relationship dysfunction is being caused, perpetuated, and exacerbated from their involvement with religious fundamentalist ideologies. The way they were raised, leaving them with unhealthy attachment styles, making them anxious attached and avoidant attached instead of securely attached. This causes all sorts of problems. I'm also learning that a lot of their relationship problems and personal problems are coming from complex trauma caused by the way that they were raised from early childhood. I didn't know this until recently, but research shows that when a child is spanked by their parent or any kind of corporal punishment where the child is being hit, it causes the same response in the child's mind as any other kind of physical abuse, like a drunk parent beating them for no reason. I didn't know this till recently. I was spanked when I was a kid, and I was always an advocate of being of spanking your kids. Now my kids are two of them are adults. Uh, I've changed my mind on a lot of this stuff. And I've been diagnosed, I'll just be honest with you, I've been diagnosed with depression and anxiety disorder, and I found out that it comes back from some of the ways that I was raised. Now, I'm not in this place where I'm blaming my parents for this kind of stuff, okay? It's not like that. It's, uh, it's the phase of consciousness of humanity into which I was born. It's what the people are doing. So I'm not resentful or angry at my parents for how I was raised. It's just it's the spider web into which we were all born stuck, okay? And we're trying to become unstuck ever so slowly. But what I would prefer is to have been taught some things about from when I had my own kids, instead of being taught to spank kids and let them cry for hours on end because it's good for their health and stuff. Well, I think I get into some of this. I would rather have been taught about attachment theory and how attending to a young child, like 6 months old, 3 months old, attending to them too much or not attending to them enough can create, um, unhealthful attachment styles that stay with them for the rest of their life. They've done experiments with kids. Listen to me. They've done experiments with kids where they test the attachment style at 9 months old, and the attachment style stays with them at a 90% prediction rate throughout their entire life. So little things about the way we do things with babies affects them for the rest of their life. And so having little kids don't remember it. That stuff gets stored in the body, no matter how little that body is, and it stays in there. You have to feel it to heal it, they say. Okay, it stays in there until it gets processed, which oftentimes it doesn't get processed, and then wind up having relational dysfunction later in life. Now, this would have been good to know before I started having kids, like a little religious, independent, fundamental, ideologically possessed Baptist trying to fill my quiver full of arrows for the Lord. And guess what? I'm telling you, it's not going well. Okay, 23 years after we started that, it's not going well. And a whole slew of endeavors. I know a lot of people who they we're Christians, we're pleasing God, we're raising our kids right, we're homeschooling our kids, all the things. You just don't know what's coming. Okay, the ideological Christiany stuff about how to raise your kids turns out to not actually be that great practically. It turns out to be very ineffective at producing functional adults, functional, well-adjusted adults, creating lots of problems in people that we don't know we're creating. I'm trying to be real with you guys. And before you try to diagnose remotely what's going on with me, I probably have thought about this and read about it a lot more than you have, so don't do that. Pete Walker's work on complex trauma reveals the way that independent Baptists train parents to raise kids actually produces adults with unhealthy attachment styles, personality disorders, and complex PTSD. Now, the book did not say independent fundamental Baptist, but the things that are mentioned in the book is how independent fundamental Baptists are told to raise their kids. They teach that it's biblical to hit and spank and yell at their kids, causing CPTSD, and they teach them that leaving babies crying for hours on end and not realizing that they are saddling that child with unhealthy attachment styles that negatively affect them for the rest of their lives. Fundamentalist Christianity doesn't help the world deal with gender issues, how to address pandemics like COVID, or what institutions or arrangements might replace common cultural marriage as a more adaptive and more ethical. They don't help solve infrastructure problems, communication problems. They pollute the information ecology with inflammatory rhetoric that makes people magnetized toward tribalism and rivalry. They are taught what to think instead of how to think. They wind up thinking that they are morally better than anyone outside their in group, but they aren't effective at all when it comes to solving society's or community's larger problems. They are actually part of the problem. And so then I asked ChatGPT, give me 30 more examples of how this happens, of examples of where this ineffectiveness shows up. And I'm not going to do the whole font thing with these, but just quickly, and you can screenshot this if you want it. I guess I can do this right here. You can rewind to that point, screenshot that, blow it up, and get it larger if you want to read it slower on your time. But it results in marriage problems and parenting issues and avoidance of therapy, sexual dysfunction, alienation from family, suppression of emotion, codependency in relationship, guilt-based parenting, distrust of others, mismanagement of time, lack of career growth, refusal to learn from secular sources, moral grandstanding in the workplace, avoidance of science and innovation, incompetence in leadership, financial irresponsibility, career restrictions, dismissal of historic figures, simplistic thinking, rejection of evidence-based thinking, anti-intellectualism, education gaps, failure to address public health issues, opposition to social safety nets, polarization and division, failure to adapt change, mishandling of crises, and religious opposition to AI and robotics, which is interesting that ChatGPT would put that in there, suppression of medical research and infrastructure neglect. These are just some ideas, okay? What if we, for example, took 30 things like this and said, okay, if we're going to edify people, then Christians should be leading the way in being more effective with these things. Then what would the world look like? I asked ChatGPT about Rodney Navy's statement here in light of all this that we've talked about. And it says it devalues practical achievements and problem solving. It promotes passive and ineffective thinking. It deflects responsibility from real world issues. It frames effectiveness as worldly and distracts from real solutions. Notice that it's spot on. It encourages tribalism and moral superiority. It contradicts the Bible's call for stewardship and practical love. And then it gives you a conclusion there. What else did I ask it? This might be way too small. But I asked it, okay, how could the doctrine of imputed righteousness cause problems here? And it gave a bunch of these. It shifts the focus from action to mere belief. It encourages tribalism and in group superiority. It creates a sense of moral license. It leads to dismissal of practical wisdom and self improvement. It reinforces theological echo chambers. It provides an excuse for avoiding real responsibility. It leads to misunderstanding of sanctification. It disconnects Christianity from real world effectiveness. And I think those are the major points there. And what else do we have? That is the end of the show. That's the last slide that I have for that. So the main point I want to drive home is this sense that I pick up when I listen to Christians. People ask me what preachers I'm listening to. Be honest with you, I don't listen to preachers. Okay, I don't listen to Christian teachers. Now, if somebody sends me, don't look. If you send me a clip that you want me to listen to, tell me why you want me to listen to it and maybe the relevant timestamp, because I don't have time to sit here and listen to like 2-3 hour video clips if it's just and I don't know where it's headed or why you sent it to me. Okay. And if you really want me to listen, uh, you know, I was listening to a bluegrass band one time, and they said, oh, I was in Tennessee, and they said, we take requests. We take requests. If you want us to play any song, just write that song down on the back of a $50 bill and drop it up here in the bucket. Okay. Something like that. Time is money. And if you want my time to listen to something so that I can respond to it, if you want to hear my response, throw a little something in the plate. Okay. Because it becomes difficult. I got people sending me stuff all the time. And most of the time, because there's simply not enough time in the day, I just have to ignore most of it. But this where was I going with that? I was listening to a clip from somebody. Oh yeah, I don't listen to preachers, okay? So every once in a while somebody will post something and they will tell me, "Oh, this guy says this particular thing," or I'll listen to preachers in order to critique them and do a video, but like by and large, if somebody's behind a pulpit and they're speaking from a Christian perspective, 90% of what they're saying is moralism. It doesn't produce effectiveness, and it's not actually doing anything to make anything better in a practical sense. It's perpetuating and exacerbating problems that already exist. Okay. Now, the people that I'm talking to one couple right now who's having problems with their relationship. And this girl grew up independent Baptist. I mean, the independent Baptists, we're like the Pharisees of the Baptists. We know the whole Bible. We know all the stuff. And they got problems. Well, guess what? The church that learning all the verses, knowing all the things, following all the rules did not help. Okay? So as churchy people, we are doing something wrong and we need to wake up to this. Okay? We need to wake up to this and we need to start focusing on becoming effective. Lighthouse Keeper says Calvin opposed fine arts, especially theater, and he denounced Copernicus as well. Calvinists reject artistic representations of Christ. The cool thing about Calvin is that we can thank Calvin for our wristwatches. Notice how Geneva, Switzerland, the Swiss wristwatch is real famous. I have one actually that I bought in Switzerland back in the year 2000, and it still works. They're famous for their Swiss watches because he didn't allow jewelry. And so to get around this, they designed clocks that go on the wrist. And so they weren't jewelry, they're timepieces. And that's where the wristwatch came from. So we can so they could still wear something that kind of had some bling to it, kind of looked nice and pretty, but there was a function to it. It helps me tell time. And now it's not jewelry, that kind of thing. So that's kind of interesting. All right, people. I hope this has been helpful. Let me turn on these QR codes here. If you want to support the channel, you can click on one of these QR codes and scan one of these QR codes. It'll take you to the page where you can donate to beyondthefundamentals.com. 5 different electronic ways you can donate. People send me emails all the time about, hey, can I send a check or a wire transfer? Yeah, you can do that too. Just contact me. We'll hook that up. But those of you who support, thanks a lot. Those who don't and can't, don't worry about it. But if you can, it'd be great. It helps. I got all kinds of content that I want to do another Sunday series. Okay, and we did all 20 parts of Colossians. I want to do another Sunday series going through either maybe Ephesians or the Gospel of John or the parables of Jesus or the book of Proverbs, for example. Those are all things that I want to do. I can't afford to do them. Okay, because I have too many other obligations. And one thing that would get that time is if the donations come up, it would provide for that time, make this kind of thing possible. So bear that kind of stuff in mind. Couldn't do this without you. And I had a good time today. Thanks for chiming in, those of you who are here. And I'm looking forward to next time. Thanks for watching. May the Lord bless you and good day.